Hi everyone, and welcome to a special live chat via Spreecast with Dr. Dean Ornish, President and Founder of the Preventive Medicine Research Institute in Sausalito, California, Clinical Professor of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and one of our mentors for the Wall Street Journal's Startup of the Year documentary series. I'm Juhi Desai, Production Associate for the WSJ Startup of the Year, and manning this machine as the producer behind the scenes is my colleague Tom Corrigan. Dr. Ornish, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here, Susie. Thank you.
So if you could tell us about the beginnings of your nonprofit organization, the Preventive Medicine Research Institute. Our series of WSJ Startup of the Year is all about startups and the ordeals and hardships that go behind being an entrepreneur. So if you could tell us briefly about your journey as an entrepreneur 30 years ago when you started the Institute.
Sure. Well, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit institute, being an entrepreneur has a lot in common. In some ways, it's harder to raise money for a nonprofit because you're asking people to give you money just because of the power of your idea and not because they're likely to make any return on that. But the ideas are still the same. And I started the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute in 30 years ago in 1984, 1983, 84. Because I wanted to have the freedom to explore ideas. Everything we've done since then has been a disruptive idea. And anytime you're doing something that's new, it's inherently disruptive and often threatening to the current interests or the power structure or just the sense of order that the current beliefs often provide. And so for me to have the freedom, I mean, on the one hand, it's hard because I had to raise all the money, at least initially, and I had to be responsible for everything. But that's also the opportunity, because it gave me the freedom to pursue these ideas. So at the time, it was thought, for example, that heart disease could only slow down the rate at which it got worse. You couldn't actually get better. You couldn't reverse it. And so in a series of studies, we were able to prove for the first time that you could actually reverse heart disease, that instead of getting worse and worse, most people could get better and better, and much more quickly than people had once thought. We found that in just a month that the chest pain or angina went away in most people. The blood flow improved to the heart. It could pump blood more normally. And over a longer period of time, we found even the clogged arteries became measurably less clogged. And then we went on to study prostate cancer, and we found that we could stop or reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer. That was thought impossible. By extension, breast cancer. We found that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes and turns on the good genes and turns off the bad genes, particularly the genes that cause heart disease, cancer, and diabetes and things like that. We also found that we could even change your telomeres, the ends of your chromosomes that control how long you live. We showed for the first time that as your telomeres get longer, your life gets longer. And we were able to actually show that lifestyle changes could increase your telomeres. This is based on work that Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn and others who received the Nobel Prize for discovering telomerase and telomeres. And then finally, I learned that, it's not enough to have good science, you have to have reimbursement. And so if it's not reimbursable, it's not sustainable. When we published all of our studies showing what a powerful difference these lifestyle changes could make, I thought it would change medical practice. And to some degree it did, but not nearly as much as I'd hoped. Now, about 2 years ago, Medicare agreed to cover my program as a Dr. Dean Ornish's program for reversing heart disease, the first time that Medicare has covered a branded program or an integrative medicine program. And because of that, we've now partnered with a company called Healthways that'll enable us to expand this and to really create a new paradigm of real healthcare rather than sick care by training hospitals and clinics and doctors first throughout the country and then throughout the world.
Great. Well, it seems like I already, from what you've said, have thought of so many different questions, even aside from the ones that we've got lined up, which I'll be getting to very soon. So we actually have our first question coming from one of our Startup of the Year startups, ACS Technologies, and they're actually going to be joining us on camera to ask their question. And they also are involved in the health space in a way, which they'll be able to talk about. So ACS Technologies should be up in just a second. But so ACS Technologies actually deals with the ever-growing issue of hearing loss and bringing sound to the ear in a richer way, so that you're not constantly getting your eardrums beat to death. And it's more of an issue than people think. I myself have dealt with hearing loss on one side of my body, and it affects you a lot. And I think it's just something that a lot of people don't really think about. when they are able to hear from both sides.
And
So
especially in people in my generation, where we grew up listening to a lot of loud rock music before people realized what an effect it was having on their hearing. And so many of the super rock superstars are wearing hearing aids now just because they abused their ears at a time when people didn't realize what the long-term effects would be.
yeah, so and actually we're having a little bit of trouble bringing ACS on the screen, so we're going to ask their question from what we have here on the screen. So they ask, Dr. Ornish, how do you view the recently documented 30% increase in adolescent hearing loss due to the use of personal listening devices, and how can this impact overall public health?
Well, as you indicate, hearing is really important. And for people who are deaf or people who are blind, sometimes people say that being deaf is actually worse than being blind, because so much of the connection that we have with other people is through the sound and the sound of their voice, what they're saying, and so on. And so as parents, it's really incumbent upon us. I know I've got a 4-year-old girl, for example, and I always make sure that when she's listening to her iPad or her iPod, that I listen to the sound level before I give it to her. I teach her how important it is not to exceed certain levels. And to the degree that you can program your device so that it can only go to a certain level and no higher, then you can really be a good parent and help your kids preserve their hearing. And as they get older, I also have a 12-year-old boy who's a musician. He's a rocker and jazz pianist and drummer. And so we have long conversations about how important it is to preserve your hearing, and that the really cool people now are wearing earplugs at rock concerts or when they perform, or they have specially molded things made for their ears so they can hook up to the sound mixer so they can hear themselves at a volume that won't damage their ears. I think there's a growing awareness of the importance of that.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that. I know ACS is continuously working on issues like this, so thank you very much for that. Next, we're going to be having Nathan Benjamin, who is another one of our entrepreneurs on WSJ Startup of the Year. He's from a company called Planet Reuse Marketplace. Hi, Nathan.
Hello. I have a question for you. You've made it your mission to fundamentally change the way people view and live their lives. We at Planet Reuse Marketplace are trying to do the same by shifting the way consumers purchase, use, and discard home improvement materials. What strategies and advice would you have for a startup that is looking to alter the long-held behaviors and points of view?
Well, one of the things that we've learned that might be helpful to you is what enables people to make sustainable changes in their lives, whether it's in their diet or whether it's in their behavior in the ways that you're talking about. And what doesn't work is what most people try to do, which is fear. And I think it's part of what Al Gore has been struggling with in terms of trying to get people interested in global warming. It's very hard to act about something bad, really bad, that might happen years down the road. Even if it's only 10 years down the road, for many people that's a long time. So for example, telling somebody, don't smoke because you might get a heart attack or lung cancer, or put that cheeseburger down because you might get a stroke, 20 or 30 years down the road, that doesn't work very well. In fact, for people who are teenagers, telling somebody that smoking is dangerous, not only is it not helpful, it's counterproductive. It just makes it cool, like, oh, I'm like riding a Harley, that kind of thing. So the language that we use is important. On the other hand, putting it into present tense really does make a difference. That fear is not a sustainable motivator, but joy is, and feeling good is. And so if I tell somebody, don't smoke because you might get a heart attack or lung cancer 20 years from now, that's not going to be very motivating. Maybe if someone's had a heart attack, even then they'll only do it for a month or so. Then the denial comes back, because we all know we're going to die, but nobody wants to think about it, so we don't. So I've just found that efforts to try to motivate people to change that are fear-based are not sustainable, but joy is. So if I tell somebody, smoking constricts your blood vessels, it makes you wrinkle faster, and you look 20 years older, you have that gray pallor. It also restricts blood flow to your sexual organs, and so it's the anti-Viagra. Half of guys who smoke, even in their 20s or 30s, have what's politely called erectile dysfunction, or they're impotent, because it's constricting the blood flow to your sexual organs, as opposed to drugs like Viagra that dilate them. And so telling somebody smoking is dangerous just makes it cool. Telling it makes you ugly and impotent is not cool. And so the same is true for the kind of work that you're doing. If you can bring it into present tense, make it fun and cool, and to show about how it's going to create a sense of meaning and community, as well as a sense of pleasure, I find those are what really are sustainable.
That's great advice. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I hope it's useful.
Thank you.
Nathan, thank you so much for coming on camera to ask that question. So Dean, I was wondering, when you were talking about partnering with Healthways to
Mhm.
spread your program, your dieting program, over to more of the masses, I have a question. Did you license your programs to Healthways specifically?
We did, and I think this might be of interest to anyone doing a startup, because most people who do startups eventually end up selling them to someone else. Not always, like Jeff Bezos is, I think, is a perfect example of someone who did a startup and had the vision to really stick with it. And I think because he was able to do that, and Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, to get away from this quarter to quarter mentality of, you can only make decisions to get profits in the next quarter. And Jeff, for example, at Amazon made a conscious decision. I'm going for long-term market share, and was able to resist the investors who said we need to show more revenue in the next quarter. He said, no, I'm looking at the long view here. And we've taken that approach as well. And so one of the advantages of having my own nonprofit is that we could take the long view. And so when Medicare agreed to, we actually did a startup 4 years ago, a digital platform that we were going to take what we learned and put it on an online for-profit company. And we raised about $1.8 million from angel investors, some icons in the business, people like Mark Benioff from Salesforce.com, and Piero Midyar and Jeff Skoll from eBay, and Evan Williams, who co-founded Twitter, people like that. And we got to the wireframe stage, and then Medicare surprised me after 16 years of review to cover our program as a branded Dr. Dean Ornish program. I thought they would do it generically. I was just going to give it away. But they're so concerned about quality assurance and fraud and abuse, and after 16 years of reviewing our work, they knew that we'd do a really good job. So they gave this unprecedented opportunity to get this work out to the people who can benefit the most from it. So we spent the last 2.5, 3 years talking with different potential partners, because we don't have the resources to scale it nationally and worldwide to meet the demand. We've had over 5,000 healthcare professionals who've called us and want us to train them without any marketing or advertising or PR or anything. So we talked to a number of the big pharma companies, and they said that they really want to move in this direction. But it became clear over time that there was a good chance that they wouldn't do a very good job, because it's so out of their wheelhouse of what they're used to. And in fact, the more successful we became, the more we were threatening their core business of prescribing drugs, because we were getting people off their cholesterol-lowering drugs and other medications more often than not. So they offered us a huge amount of money, but we ended up walking away from that, because for me, it's my life's work. And I think that's an important lesson for any entrepreneur, is that, the integrity with which you do something is ultimately going to be the best business decision as well. Because the most precious commodity that we have is trust and integrity. If, everything stems from that. If people trust you, they believe you, and even on a individual level, the support groups that we have in terms of helping people change their lifestyle, it's all about creating a safe environment where people feel a sense of trust. It really permeates the DNA of everything that you do. People trust you. They want to be your customers. They want to be your partners. They can open up in a group and talk about what's really going on in their lives, which is so healing, because anything that connects us is really powerful and healing. It's why, to me, the real unmet need in any entrepreneur in any business is the need for connection and community, because of the breakdown of the social networks that we used to have. People don't have a neighborhood where you've got 3 generations of people living together, or a job that feels secure, or an extended family you see regularly. And so that need for connection and community is primal. And if you can tap into such a primal need even a little bit, you can create a multi-billion-dollar business, like the chat rooms in AOL 10 or 15 years ago, or the lounges in Starbucks, or what Facebook is doing. These are not the most intimate of life experiences, but it's such a primal need that even a little bit can create a huge business. So when you can approach what you're doing with that sense of passion and purpose, that what you're doing is making a difference in the world. It's not just about the money. Yes, if you do the good work, the money will follow. If you focus only on the money, then you generally end up with nothing. And so by staying true to our principles and walking away from what was, for me, an unimaginable amount of money, and saying, I don't know where this is going. I'm going to have to fund this out of my own for a while, until we find the right partner, but it's worth doing. And we did. And Healthways, we now have an exclusive relationship with them. It was announced about 3 weeks ago. They're close to $1 billion company. They specialize in wellness, disease management, helping people change their lifestyles. And so they really appreciate the nuances of what they're doing. And what I especially like about them is that everything that they said that they would do, they're doing. And so that sense of integrity really breeds trust, and for me, trust is everything. And so now that we have that, we can embody the core values that we're teaching others, which in turn will make us that much more successful as well.
Great. And when you come up with such new and innovative ideas, you know, so part of the challenge is to get people to believe in you and to try out what you're putting out there. And so, what was your greatest challenge in coming up with your programs and having people try them out and accept them?
The biggest challenge is to believe in what you're doing, because if you're doing something that's inherently disruptive, which new powerful ideas are, it threatens people. And when people are threatened, they often respond in ways that are not always rational. And so it's important to have that sense of belief. And to me, the most powerful way of doing that is we all have an inner wisdom, an inner teacher, an inner guru, if you will, that speaks very clearly but very quietly. It gets drowned out by the chatter of everyday life. It's the voice that wakes you up at 3 in the morning. You go, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that you should be doing. You need to hear this. It's important. There's your own inner voice telling you. I'm sure you must have had experiences like that where you wake up in the middle of the night and you go, why didn't I think of that before? It's because finally your mind is quieted down enough to hear that inner voice. But there are techniques of accessing it more directly through, I find meditation is a very powerful way of doing that. In whatever way you meditate, whether it's religious or secular, it doesn't matter. But you quiet down your mind and body enough to hear that inner voice. And it speaks very clearly, but very quietly. You can access it and you can dialogue with it. And so at the end of a meditation, I'll ask myself, what am I not paying attention to that I need to hear that's important? And listen. And you'd be surprised what emerges from that. And then you begin to trust your own inner voice, your own inner wisdom. And so then when you go out in the world and people challenge you or they criticize you or they make fun of you or all the things, or they try to undermine you, because, again, powerful ideas are inherently disrupting, and they often bring out the worst in people, not just competitors, but just because of the order that the current beliefs. This goes all the way back to a wonderful book that influenced my thinking called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N. And he talked about when when in the 16th century, when an Italian philosopher named Bruno said that the Earth is not the center of the universe, they tortured him and killed him. But then Galileo came along 100 years later and showed people how they could use a telescope to see for themselves that wasn't the case. And they still had to recant under threat of the Inquisition, but by then people could see for themselves that the old system was wrong in some fundamental ways. And so it enabled the era of science to come in. So the point is that trust your own beliefs and be open to modifying them if data shows you that you're wrong, but don't give them up just because they're threatening to people. You need to expect that if they're threatening, you should view that as a good sign. That means you're on to something that's really powerful, because otherwise people wouldn't care.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Ornish. Next, we actually have a question from one of our health-based startups from Startup of the Year, named Infina Connect Healthcare Systems. And joining us, we'll have Mr. Greg Moyer from that company. Hi, Greg. How are you?
Thanks, Jay. I'm doing well, and thank you, Dr. Ornish, for doing this with us. My question comes from our CEO, Sue Tong, who unfortunately is unable to be here today to attend. But as you know, provisions of the Affordable Care Act are scheduled to take place and take effect in January 1st, which have at least the potential to create a significant spike in January in the number of Americans with insurance or scrambling for insurance. So the question is, from your standpoint, what kind of adverse impacts would you expect our overall healthcare system to experience if this spike were to materialize in January?
Tell me about the spike. Which spike is that?
This is the individual mandate with the Affordable Care Act is scheduled to take effect on January 1st, as well as exchanges. Increase in Medicaid.
Spike in more people in the system. Is that the spike you're referring to?
More people insured in the system or scrambling for insurance to meet the deadlines and avoid penalties, yes.
No, I think it's actually a really good thing because, if everybody's in the system, then it doesn't cherry pick for the people who are really sick. And so it makes the premiums lower for most people. But put your question in a larger context. I like the Affordable Care Act because it's changing the incentives for healthcare reimbursement. And it's like, Deep Throat and Watergate, follow the money. And part of the lesson that I mentioned earlier is that if it's not reimbursable, it's not sustainable. And it's not that doctors are only interested in money, but if you're trained to use drugs and surgery, and the more surgeries you do, the more procedures you do, the more money you make, then it's only natural that's the direction medicine's going to go in, and that's what's been happening the last 40 or 50 years. That the more bypasses or angioplasties or stents or radical prostatectomies you do, the more money you make. And whereas if you sit and talk with people, you don't. Now that's being turned on its ear because in the Affordable Care Act, the reimbursement will be shifting towards fee-for-service, paying for volume to paying for value. In other words, the quality is what you'll get reimbursed for. So they'll say here, instead of saying the more stents you put into a patient's heart, the more money you make, they'll say, here's X amount of dollars to take care of somebody. You get to keep what's left over. And so interventions like changing lifestyle, like what we're recommending, that are proven to reverse heart disease and make people better, become greatly more economically beneficial as well as the right thing to do. And this is coming at a time when all the randomized trials are showing that these procedures don't work nearly as well as people thought anyway. I mean, we spent $100 billion last year on bypass surgery and angioplasty, and yet all the randomized trials have shown that unless you're in the middle of having a heart attack, angioplasties and stents, for example, don't prolong life, they don't prevent heart attacks, they don't even reduce chest pain. And so we've been paying for all these things that are dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. And yet, these simple changes that we make, like what we eat, how we respond to stress, how much exercise we get, and how much love and support we have, which are the 4 core elements of our program, these are actually, we are more powerful in many cases than the high-tech things that we become so enamored of. We tend to think of advances in medicine as being something really high-tech and expensive, a new drug, a new laser, something really new technical surgical operation. And certainly in a life-threatening crisis, that can be important. But for most people, the lifestyle changes that we make are much more powerful. And now that the incentives through accountable care organizations and medical home and integrated delivery networks and so on are changing to reimburse and reward people who can keep people healthy and help them reverse their chronic conditions through these kinds of lifestyle interventions, then there's a convergence of forces that really do make this the right idea at the right time. And I find that exciting. And if we we spent $2.8 trillion for healthcare in this country last year, which for the most part has been sick care. And so we have this massive debate going on in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, where you've got many Democrats saying, let's just raise taxes, let the deficit go up, many Republicans saying, let's just privatize or dismantle Medicare. Not much common ground there, and so it's been paralyzed. But we're saying, wait a minute, there's a third alternative, which again is what startups are all about, is finding innovative new ways of looking at the same problems from a different perspective and say, wait a minute, if 3/4 of the $2.8 trillion are for chronic diseases that we can largely prevent or even reverse by simply changing diet and lifestyle, then we can make better care available to more people at much lower cost, and the only side effects are good ones.
Hey, we're in the middle of that shift from pay for service, fee for service, to pay for value, pay for performance. So we are very familiar with that and absolutely agree with those points. Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your question.
Thank you, Greg, so much for coming on to ask the question. So our next question is actually going to be coming from one of our Wall Street Journal news editors, directly from the newsroom, Mr. Charlie Wells. How are you, Charlie?
Hey, how are you guys?
Hey, Charlie.
So nice to meet you. Thanks for taking our questions. Anyhow, I wanted to ask about people who spend long hours in offices, and I know that a lot of people who work at startups, work sort of becomes their life, and they're just spending 12, 14, 20 hours a day in an office. And I wanted to ask you, what is the main concern that these people should be thinking out from a health perspective?
Well, from a health perspective as well as from a business perspective. I mean, that's what's interesting. I mean, I've been working with Bill Clinton since 1993, and he talked publicly about how the worst decisions he ever made were the ones when he was sleep deprived, which was because he liked to stay up all night and talk, and he's such a brilliant guy that he would often just not sleep, and he realized that he paid a price for that. We all do. And so there's the health aspects. When you're 23 and you're doing a startup, there's kind of this tradition of staying up all night eating pizza and drinking Cokes and junk food. And what we're learning is that how dynamic our bodies are, how quickly things can get better or worse. when you eat a healthier life, when you sleep, when you meditate, eat a healthier foods, I say, lead a healthier life, your brain can actually grow so many new brain neurons in just a month or two that your brain can get bigger. You think more clearly, you have more energy, and you perform at a higher level. And particularly in startups, what can separate success or failure in a startup, as you know, is to be able to think multidimensionally, to see the same problem from different perspectives and not get stuck in the conventional way of doing it. But you also don't want to stuck in, if you have a new way of doing it, you don't want to get stuck in that perspective either. You want to be open to all degrees of freedom and all perspectives. It's like the number of pixels in a picture. The more pixels you have, the clearer the picture becomes. Or like the old story of the blind man and the elephant. You know, in different parts of the elephant, you get a clear picture of how to proceed. And so giving yourself, if you have, I mean, we all have deadlines. They're called deadlines for a reason because they make you dead in terms of your thinking and also in more literal ways. But there are times when you really do need to stay up all night. I remember I was writing we just wrote an article for one of the most prestigious international medical journals showing that lifestyle changes make your telomeres longer, the ends of your chromosomes that control how long you live. And I'm up at 4 in the morning doing the final edit of that, feeling like my telomeres are shrinking. So there are times when you really just have to suck it up and do that. But it's a marathon when you're doing a startup. It's not a 50-yard dash. And so while there may be times when you do that, you also need to allow yourself some downtime to recover and to find a sustainable way of working. The other thing is if you're doing a startup, you're a leader. Maybe you're the CEO or you're the manager or whatever it is, but you've got people that are reporting to you. And if they feel abused by you, if they feel a sense like you're just working them into the ground, then they'll look for the opportunity to find someone else, and that really sets you back when that occurs. So for all these reasons, it turns out that taking care of yourself is actually the best business decision you can make as well.
Great, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Charlie. So our next question is going to be coming from another one of our entrepreneurs from Startup of the Year, another health-based startup. It's called Swipe Sense, and they answer to the issue of hospital-acquired infections. Yuri, one of the co-founders, is here. How are you, Yuri?
Very good. Hi, Dr. Ornish. Thank you so much for taking the time with us today.
Sure.
So my question is related to kind of the adoption of technology in the healthcare space. As Juhi mentioned, we're introducing a novel technology-based intervention into the healthcare space to increase hand hygiene and reduce hospital-acquired infections. And I wanted to ask, what has been your experience with introducing a change in your case, although it might not be technologically based, the change of kind of lifestyle and diet changes, and kind of that resistance that you face to change in the medical industry, and kind of what we can do in general to increase the adoption of innovation in the healthcare space?
It's a really important question, and it's a very important issue you're dealing with. So first of all, I salute you for being in this space because, you know, doctors are the worst at hand washing, as it turns out. And something as simple as hand washing can prevent so many of the hospital-acquired infections, and that's becoming increasingly important because so many of these hospital-acquired infections require massive drugs to treat, and in some cases, there aren't even drugs to treat them yet. And so it's a little scary. Hospitals are dangerous places. Now, I chaired Google Health for 3 years, so I had developed more experience about what is the resistance to change. For example, then we were trying to get electronic medical records into doctors' offices and hospitals and clinics, and it just seems like such an obvious thing to do, and yet there was massive resistance because for reasons we talked about earlier, that people get used to doing things a certain way, and it's in some ways at least initially disruptive for them or even threatening for them to try to do something differently. And if you bring something in like with hand washing, it all depends on how the language becomes very important, I found. If you say or convey the impression, hey guys, you're doing it all wrong, we got the answer, and here it is, then you're going to get a lot of pushback and a lot of resistance because nobody likes to feel criticized, and there's an inherent criticism in there that you're doing it wrong and I'm doing it right, so do what I say. And once people feel criticized, they stop listening and they shut down and they either literally leave the room or they emotionally and intellectually leave the room. They stop listening, so your pitch will fall on deaf ears. On the other hand, to the degree you say, let's do this together. This is such an important question, such an important issue. We have tools that may help you do what you're doing even better and enable you to do it in ways that free up more of your time for things that you want to be doing that are more fun or more reimbursable or whatever. And so finding those ways of building bridges by being part of the solution rather than feeling like you're criticizing how they're normally doing it I find is perhaps the most important thing. And finally,
Hmm.
it's all about relationships, like anything. And to the degree that you can spend time with people, take them to lunch, form a kind of a human connection with them, help them understand that, where your passion and you really are doing this. Yeah, you want to make money because you have to make money for it to be sustainable, but your real driving principle is your passion of making a difference in the world and helping people. And so by spending time with people one-on-one or two-on-one, then it's a chance for you to form those relationships, which number one, dispel the idea that you're, criticizing or trying to impose something on them, and more that they really like you. And people like you, then they'll find ways of doing it. And it's like whether you're trying to get a journal article accepted, a grant done, an investment opportunity, a deal closed. There are always pros and cons. And so bottom line is, if they like you and they have a relationship with you, then they're going to look for the reasons to do something. If they don't, then even if they're not even consciously aware of it, they'll look for reasons not to do it that make sense to them without having to get to the more irrational feelings that people are often uncomfortable with. And yet it's our feelings that really drive these decisions way more than the facts do. Facts are important, but they're not enough for most people. You need to have that human connection.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your answer, Dr. Ornish. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yuri. So, Dr. Ornish, something that's very interesting for us is on Startup of the Year, we have featured Mr. Craig Venter as well, who is another innovator in and of himself in the whole genome industry field. And he has said about you that Dr. Ornish has done more than anybody else with modern science in applying it to the nutrition field. Now, how do you feel about comments like that when from the past few decades where you've been working your way up and accomplishing more and more? Because something that I have heard with a lot of entrepreneurs is, once they start gaining a lot of momentum and really succeeding in the things that they're trying to do, sometimes the downfall is things getting to their heads, which is something that I don't think that we have readily talked about. So, what would you say when receiving so many accolades and keeping yourself grounded?
I think that's a really important question. I know Dr. Venter well. He's amazing, one of the best, if not the best scientists in the world. I'm on the board of directors of his nonprofit institute, so I've had a chance to really up close and personal understand how visionary he is and all he's been accomplishing. So he's a real role model for me and for many others, as well as a friend. But I got profoundly depressed and to the point of being suicidal when I was in college. And I was at Rice University in Houston in 1972. I just turned 60 last month. And my college roommate at the time was one of the 4 people who scored a perfect score on his SATs. It's a long story. I wrote about him in a couple of my books. But the bottom line is I came about as close to killing myself as I can without actually doing it, because I felt like I was stupid, that I didn't know anything, that I just managed to fool people into thinking that I was smart. And now that I was in a school with a bunch of really smart people, it was just a matter of time before they figured out what a big mistake they made in letting me in. And plus, I had this spiritual vision of feeling like nothing would bring lasting happiness, that no matter how successful I became or how, fame and fortune and all the usual things people look to, that it would never be enough. And it would always be, well, now what, or so what, big deal. So that's how I got involved in many of these practices, and meditation and eating healthier and exercising and yoga, because they're not just stress management techniques. They are powerful techniques for quieting down our mind and body enough to experience more of an inner sense of peace and joy and well-being, and to realize that that's really our natural state. And it's very much at odds with what most of our culture teaches us. That the whole advertising industry is based on the idea of just buy more and get more and do more and you'll be happy. And you do that, and I'm sure everybody who's an entrepreneur has had that experience. Oh, if I can just reach $10,000 in sales or $100,000 in sales or $1 million in sales, then I'll be happy. And then you do that, and it's like, well, it's nice, but now what? It's now I got to go to the next level, or so what? Big deal. It didn't really provide what I thought it did, and that can be profoundly disheartening for people. And I find that in some cases, the most successful people on the planet are the ones who are the most unhappy, the people who are household names, because they've gotten to the end of that myth. They can't tell, once you've got, $1 billion, you can't tell yourself if you just had another $1 billion or $1 trillion, you'd be happy. Or once you're a household word, just your first name and you're a household word, you can't tell yourself, gosh, if I just had another cover story in Time Magazine, then I'd be happy, because you've already been there and it didn't really bring you what you thought, at least before you had the myth. And now it's like, well, now what? So what I find most powerful, and really why I'm so passionate about doing this work, is in many ways it's a Trojan horse to talk about what really matters in life. We're all going to die. It's just a question of when. So, unclogging arteries and living longer is nice, but telling somebody who's depressed and unhappy they're going to live longer if they just change their lifestyle isn't that motivating. It's like you're just trying to get through the day. And so I've had enough of those experiences to have more of an attitude of gratitude. When good things happen, I feel so grateful because I know what it's like to be on the other end of that spectrum. Number one. Number two, that I know that it's nice, but it's more of a reflection that we're doing a good job. It doesn't tell me who I am. I studied with this spiritual teacher for many years who liked to make puns. People say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an undo. I'm trying to stop doing those things that are disrupting my own inherent happiness and peace, as opposed to feeling like I have to get that from outside myself. And he liked to make puns. He said, we're born fine until we define ourselves, or we let other people define us, and we get stuck in these definitions of who we are. So when you realize that your happiness is not contingent on your success, that's actually a very liberating concept. It's not one that's depressing, because then you can really focus on where your happiness really does come from, and you don't get stuck in all the stress and the anxiety. Stress isn't just what you do, it's how you react to what you do. You can have two people in the same job and one thrives on it, one's overwhelmed by it. It's like surfing. If you're really good at surfing, you look for the big waves. They're fun, but for someone who's not good at managing that, they can get wiped out and stressed out from it. So what I find to be most effective is to say, to the degree that I don't define myself by my success, then the paradox is I can actually go out in the world and be more successful because I don't have all that stress and anxiety and fear. It's like, I got to be successful so that I can be a good person and people will love and respect me. It's like I feel like I have that already. That's our natural state. So then I can go out, see things more clearly, not get overcome by the stress and the anxiety. And the paradox, I'm more successful than I would be if that were my primary goal. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
It did, and it's interesting how I know I asked a pretty simple question, and it's so interesting how far it really goes in terms of having mental stability and physical and mental health when running a business, or I mean, of course, doing anything in life, but especially when running a startup, when you're not just going to a job that is always where everything's always going to run in a certain way. Anything can happen, and it is so important to have that mental balance. And when things go wrong and when things go really right, you're absolutely right, where things really do need to have a balance when in your mental stability. And just for the audience, the reason that I had brought up Mr. Craig Venter and the connection with Dr. Ornish is because we have been featuring clips from an interview that we did with him on the WSJ Startup of the Year website. And just to plug the website, it is wsj.com/SOTY, which stands for Startup of the Year. And speaking of Startup of the Year, our next question is actually coming from one of our editors for the documentary series, Miss Gabriella Stern. She is also the Deputy Managing Editor for the Digital Network at the WSJ. Gabby, welcome.
Hi, Dean. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Gabby.
We can hear you.
Good. Thanks so much for coming on. I had to come on and ask you a couple questions. First of all, you mentioned yoga, and I'm curious about your thoughts about yoga. I love yoga, but so many people in my classes are coming to yoga for the exercise, and they get all.
I'm sorry, you're kind of fading out. Can you speak just a little bit louder?
Start with.
I'm getting about every.
And some discussion. Oh.
Okay.
I'm going to try to. Can you hear me better now?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about yoga and the benefits of yoga versus so many people do yoga for exercise. Does that irritate you? Do you think that if you're doing yoga for the exercise, are you missing out on other health benefits?
Well, it's a good start. Yoga can be a good form of exercise, and I'm happy to whatever degree people are doing anything. One of the interesting things we found in all of our studies was that it's not all or nothing. The more you change, the more you improve. The more you move, the more you improve, whether it's through yoga or exercise or other things like that. So it's always a good start. And my teacher used to say, I'm less concerned about being able to stand on your head as I am that you can stand on your feet. You know, in other words, you can be independent and grounded and so on. So for many people, that's a doorway. You know, so much of yoga in the West has been the physical postures and the stretching and things related to that. But if you actually go back to how yoga evolved, it was really just the beginning, so people could learn to sit still, so they could then do what even more powerful techniques like the breathing techniques and meditation and imagery and things of that sort, which are amazingly powerful. Now, part of the problem is that when you're actually doing yoga, you know, the physical postures, the asanas, it looks like you're, quote, doing something. You know, it looks impressive, or tying yourself in knots and so on. Whereas when you're meditating, you're just, you know, you're sitting there, your eyes are closed, and it doesn't look like you're doing anything. And we've all got 1,000 things on our to-do list. It's like, why am I sitting here, you know, watching my breath or repeating a sound when I've got 10,000 things I should be doing that are more important? And so it's easy not to do that or even to value it. And yet meditation is really about bringing your awareness to one thing. It can be anything, but traditionally through spiritual traditions, you find sounds that are very similar. Om or Shalom or Salam or Amin or Amen or even the word one. They start with an O or an A, they end with an M or an N. They're very soothing sounds. And, you know, meditation is very easy to learn. It's very hard to master. You just basically make a sound like one or Om. And then when you run out of air, you do it again. Now, what happens is your mind wanders. And when you become aware that your mind's wandering, just bring it back over and over again. That's really all meditation is. But what happens is a number of desirable things occur. You get very focused. And anytime you can focus better, you can concentrate better. Anytime you can focus energy, you gain more power. It's like a magnifying glass. You can focus the sun's rays and burn through paper. Or a laser is just coherent light. Although waveforms are in step, you can burn through steel. Your mind is no different. So whatever you're doing, whether it's in the boardroom or in the entrepreneur suite or in school or in sports, you know, when you can focus better, you can perform better. You also, on a sensual level, you enjoy things more, whether it's food or sex or music or art or massage. When you pay attention to it, when you bring your full awareness to what you're doing, it's more sensual. You enjoy it more. The third thing that
That's
happens.
What they call mindfulness, right?
That's what they call mindfulness.
That's what
exactly.
They call mindfulness.
Or in sex, it's a tantra. Or in food, it's more mindful eating. You know, you have more pleasure with fewer calories when you pay attention to what you're eating, for example. But also, perhaps most important, and what most people don't talk about, is what we were discussing earlier, and that your mind begins to quiet down and you begin to feel more peaceful. Now, often people say, oh, that meditation made me peaceful. That brought me that sense of peace from outside myself. When in fact, it's simply quieting down your mind enough to experience your own inner peace that's always there. Now, that may sound like semantics, but it's radically different, because if I think that I'm stressed out because I'm not getting something that I think I need, then it's all about what's out of me that I can't control. But if my inherent state is to be peaceful and I'm not getting something, then I can ask myself, what am I doing that I can change? Not to blame, but to empower myself so that I can go out into the world and not be looking for what's there already and disturbing that inner peace that's always there. And so, you know, many people who are entrepreneurs don't have time. You know, time is your most precious commodity. And so just spend a few minutes, 5 minutes, even 1 minute can make a difference. That it's the consistency more than the duration that matters, and it carries with you throughout the day.
Thank you, Dean. That's really helpful.
Thank you, Gabby.
And thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Gabby, for joining us. And Dean, I wanted to ask you about, interestingly, you know, as we all know, doctors who are always suggesting different ways to have healthier lifestyles and to live well and live better. But coincidentally, a lot of physicians aren't able to live that lifestyle themselves if they're working in certain areas of the hospital or certain specializations. And do you have anything to say for the company culture of working as a physician? You know, how do you think that there is anything being done to promote better culture within the workspace for physicians who just work too much?
Yeah, you know, physicians, we have among the highest rates of divorce, drug addiction, and suicide of any identifiable group. We're not the best examples. And as you know, the best teacher is a good example. So if I tell a patient, you know, you really shouldn't be smoking, you know, it's not going to be that effective. And so telling our patients that they should lead healthier lives, and, you know, the average doctor actually dies 10 years sooner than the rest of the population. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. Now, somebody once told me that, evil can act when it gets you to do something that's, even for a higher purpose that is, harming you. Sometimes when I work with people who are really overworked and stressed out, I say, to which organ does your heart pump blood first? And people think, well, it's your brain or your lungs or whatever. So no, it actually pumps blood to itself first through the coronary arteries so that it can then take care of the rest of the body. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they do that, drill where they teach you how to buckle your seatbelt, which is something no one ever knows how to do, But they also say, if the cabin loses air pressure and the oxygen mask coming down, what are you supposed to do? You put it on yourself first, and then you put it on your kid. Because if you put it on your kid and then you pass out, the kid won't know what to do. So taking care of yourself is really the most unselfish thing you can do if it enables you then to help other people better. And so I think we need to take the large review here, whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a physician, that the time that you spend with your friends and your family and your loved ones and taking care of yourself and meditating a few minutes a day and eating healthier is really the most selfish thing you can do for your business or for your patients, because you're going to make better decisions, you're going to be around longer, and you're going to be able to think more multidimensionally in ways that ultimately will make you more successful.
Great, thank you so much. I know that overworking is something that a lot of us are very familiar with, especially in New York City and so many other places, of course. But it's thank goodness for companies that do understand the importance of well-being mentally and physically. And I know Wall Street Journal is definitely one of those places. And so I'm in a good spot for now. So our next question is actually going to be coming from one of our viewers, Miss Brenda Thompson. And Miss Thompson is a PhD in psychology. Did I get that right, Miss Thompson? Psychology?
That's correct. Yes.
Great, and she's based out in Las Vegas. And so Brenda, fire off your question.
Hello, Dr. Ornish, and thank you for taking our call and information today. This is very informative. I would like to ask you a question. I'm doing a lot of research on oxidative stress, and I'm sure you may be aware of Dr. Joe McCord and all of his 40 plus years of research that he's done on oxidative stress. And I'd like to know your insight and what you think about it and how we can do things differently as we're trying to figure out how to make ourselves look fantastic on the outside, but my concern is making sure that I look good on the inside. I kind of attribute it to, if my car looks fantastic, it's shiny, it looks really, really good, but if I'm not changing the oil, it really isn't doing a whole lot of good. It's not going to last very long, right?
No, that's important work. Oxidative stress is one of the mechanisms of aging, and it has to do with damage to your DNA that controls so many of things in our body. But to put your question in a larger context, you're absolutely right. You can focus on just, having six-pack abs and looking good, but being sick inside. I remember when I was an intern at the Massachusetts General Hospital back in 1981, I was in the emergency room, and Tony Conigliaro, a World Series baseball player, came in with a heart attack. And here's a guy who just massively looked so healthy, ripped and six-pack abs and everything. But inside, he was dying because his heart was so severely clogged. And so you're absolutely right. We need to look at the whole person and not just the externals. What we find is that when you make these simple changes, it's not like there's one, we did, one set of lifestyle recommendations for reversing heart disease and a different one for prostate cancer, a different one for changing your genes. And we also found, by the way, that oxidative stress goes way down in these patients, that the genes that actually regulate oxidative stress are downregulated or turned off, hundreds of them in just 3 months when we published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. In fact, Craig Venter was the communicating editor on that article. When you look at your telomeres, when you look at medical costs, whatever you look at, if you focus on health, then all the various mechanisms that we look at get better. It's not like you have to target one particular one. And it's the same lifestyle recommendations for all of them. And it's not all or nothing. We found that the more people change, as I mentioned earlier, the better they get in every way we can measure, whether it's their oxidative stress, whether it's their telomere length, whether it's gene expression, what's their percent diameter stenosis, the amount of blockage in their coronary arteries. The more you change, the more you improve. And I find that as a very powerful and empowering message to give people, because so often people think like, I do this and don't do that, and eat this and don't eat that, and these are good foods and these are bad foods. And once you label foods as good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I ate bad food. And then might as well finish the pint of ice cream at that point. And so instead what we say, look, foods are just foods, but some are healthier for you than others. So I wrote a book called The Spectrum, which if you go to ornish.com, this is all there as well. It's all free, where I categorize foods from the most helpful group 1 to the least helpful group 5, and said what matters most is your overall way of eating and living. So if you indulge yourself one day, eat healthier the next. To the degree that you move in this direction, there's a corresponding benefit. But this way you can't, if you go on a diet, you're going to go off a diet, because diets are all about, you know, what you can't have and what you must do. But this is more of a sustainable way of eating and living. So to the degree that directionally you're moving in a healthier way, then you're going to look better and feel better and lose weight and gain health and have your oxidative stress reduced all at the same time.
You always say that anything that has dye in it, D-I-E, I'm not really sure if I really want to go that route. So I really agree with you on that. All right, doctor. Well, thank you so much for answering. Absolutely. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Brenda, thanks so much for coming on. We're actually going to now go to our last question, which is going to be asked by ACS Technologies. We got a question from them as our first question, and we'll round off with them as well. This is Mr. Stephen Ambrose from ACS Technologies. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Hi, Julie. Thank you. Hi, Dr. Ornish. I've really been spellbound throughout this whole spreecast and very, very delighted to hear your commentary. It's the most positive I've heard ever. I thank you for
Thank you.
I'm the founder of ACS Technologies, and we invented a second eardrum that absorbs overpressures that would trigger the acoustic reflex, where you involuntarily turn your volumes way down, and this is why people listen to personal listening devices 5 times too loud. At the beginning of the spreecast, you mentioned that musicians are using devices on stage to protect their hearing and plugging in, you know, I invented those back in the 70s. They're called wireless in-ear stage monitors. I did that with Stevie Wonder. And we discovered that those, thank you, those cause damage. There's a 70–80% risk of hearing loss associated with using those, as well as the earbuds that most of us are using on this. So we actually filmed the eardrum moving visibly when the kick drum hits the bass in rock and roll under sealed conditions. And we built this second eardrum, which causes the pressure to beat up this device. I don't know if you can see this. And it absorbs and takes the abuse instead. I have one here, and I can show you the little eardrums on it.
Cool.
And this, we tested.
So it's easily removable.
We tested this at Vanderbilt in a formal study, and it shows that you can use from 1/4 to 1/16 the power. So this is our answer to people going deaf listening to these. And because you're such an icon in preventative health care, and you're such an entrepreneur, and you've brought forward probably a tremendously disruptive, unpopular idea in you know, not staying with the conventions of spending so many billions on cardiovascular operations and this sort of thing. I have tremendous respect for that. Can you mentor us on how we can do the same in the world of hearing aids and earbuds?
Well, first of all, thank you for your kind words, which mean the world to me. Second, I so appreciate your making a difference in the world, and you're a perfect example of an entrepreneur who's mission-driven, that's not simply in it for the money, but trying to make a difference. And in order to make a sustainable difference, you need to create a business that can generate enough money to pay its employees and pay its bills and do the good work that you're doing. I generally find that awareness is the first step in healing. You know, and science is one good way of increasing awareness, but reimbursement is actually even more powerful. And so to the extent that you can gather data like the one you did at Vanderbilt, and in parallel do studies showing that this is effective, that it's not only medically effective, but it's also cost effective, that you can show that whatever the device costs, that it more than has a 3x or 4x or 10x return. Not simply, unfortunately, just telling people that they're saving their hearing, you'd think that would be enough, but unfortunately it's not always the case. But if you can show that it's saving a lot of money for their employer, for their third-party payers, or whoever is footing the bills for these things, then you're going to create more of a sense of demand for that and receptivity for it. And finally, to the extent that you can bring in some real thought leaders, if you can bring in some rock stars who've lost their hearing and say, wow, this is a really cool device, and make it, this is what Steve Jobs did so well, was to make things really cool, not just functionally beautiful and not just you know, with the tech specifications that were so much better than others, but that's just the cool factor. And so if you can bring in some rock stars, and that should be fairly easy given the work that you're doing, and say, wow, if I'd only had this, I'd be able to hear now, and I don't want this to happen to you. It's like back in the 60s, Frank Zappa used to do these great ads to try to get people not to use drugs like speed. It just made it much more effective than this is your brain on drugs kind of thing. So the combination of showing that it's medically effective, that it's cost effective, and then raising the awareness by making it cool, I think you have an unbeatable combination.
You're very kind.
I like one myself.
I think those are very astute observations. Last week we presented the first professional prototype to Stevie Wonder, and he's agreed to participate in our Wall Street Journal membership and so forth.
Oh, fantastic.
So
That's
we're
great.
taking your advice.
I've worked with him in the past.
Have you?
I've worked with him in the past. He's a very, very cool and very smart guy, and very committed and passionate. So you couldn't have, you couldn't get anyone better than him. That's fantastic.
Well, as one of the Wall Street Journal mentors, I look forward to the opportunity to work together with both you and he, if that chance should arise, because I think your help is vital.
That would make me very happy.
Thank you very much.
Stephen, thank
Keep
you
up
so
your
much
great
for
work.
coming on.
Let me just say in closing how much I appreciate the chance to share this with your viewers. I hope that it's been useful. You know, being an entrepreneur, whether it's in the nonprofit or for-profit world, is hard, but it's worth it because you can really make a difference in the world and create something that can help people that you'll never meet. And when we're all, you know, 150 years old on our deathbeds, looking back over our lives, I think what's going to matter most is not simply how much money you made, which is, it's important to have enough, but once you get it past a certain point, it's how meaningful our lives have been. And so to the extent that you can create a startup, whether for-profit or nonprofit, that's not just going to be successful in a monetary economic sense, but it's going to do meaningful work, then you're likely to have both. So thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ornish, so much. We've had a lot of screencasts over the past few weeks with Startup of the Year, and it's been, every single one has been very different and very informative, and this one just as well has been very unique and a very different experience for me and for all the viewers. And thank you so much for coming on, and we look forward to more in, collaboration with you for the Startup of the Year project.
Thank you, and for those who want more information about our work, just go to Ornish, ORNISH.com. It's all there. Thanks again.
Thank you. And I'm just going to plug in our Startup of the Year information as well. So we're actually doing a Tech Innovators Week this week, and we're covering, featuring a lot of our more science-oriented mentors, including yourself, Dr. Ornish. And so if you check out our website, wsj.com/SOTY, you can check out all the different clips we've been putting on, and this freecast will live there as well later this week. And follow Dr. Ornish at Dean Ornish, MD on Twitter. And follow at WSJ Startup, which is the Twitter handle for the Accelerators blog of the Wall Street Journal, and also where the tweets for Startup of the Year live, and hashtag WSJSOTY. And again, Dr. Ornish, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everybody out in Spreecast land for joining us as well.
Thanks again.
Thank you.